Happy 30th birthday, Calliope. Officially, you're a ghost now. I watched my mom post on Instagram the title, "The Only Daughter They're Proud Of." $1 million party funded entirely by money in my bank account. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I simply clicked like and signed the virtual eviction notice from their pampered life. 3 days later, the power went out, the water stopped running, and their perfect world became a desolate, stagnant grave. I ignored the panic calls, turned my back on their bitter betrayal, and sank into a different kind of stillness. The silence of the server room is a specific kind of cold. It's a dry, sterile chill that bites at your knuckles and hums in a low, mechanical frequency, a constant reminder that data never sleeps. I sat alone in my glass-walled office on the top floor of the Phoenix Tech Corridor, the city below a sprawling carpet of amber lights and restless movement. It was 11:50 p.m. on January 13th, 2026. In 10 minutes, I would officially turn 30. There were no balloons taped to my monitors. No half-eaten sheet cake in the break room with my name scrawled in lopsided frosting. Just the blue glow of 4 separate displays reflecting in my glasses and the rhythmic pulse of a system status bar. I've spent a decade building these infrastructures, weaving logic into copper and silicon, creating systems that don't fail because they aren't allowed to be emotional. I used to think I was like that. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I was the reliable one, the daughter who never asked for a thing but provided everything, the world would eventually balance the scales. I reached for my personal phone, tucked beneath a stack of circuit blueprints. Part of me, the foolish 30-year-old child still living deep inside my ribs, expected a notification. A text from my mother, Lori perhaps. A "Happy birthday, Calliope" sent a few minutes early. I swiped the screen. Silence. No messages from home. No missed calls from my twin sister, Jody. Just an automated reminder from my dentist and a LinkedIn notification. I looked back out at the skyline. Somewhere out there, life was loud. Somewhere, people were laughing over dinner, toast to milestones, and making promises they intended to keep. I stared at the contrast between my monitor's cold light and those distant, warm flickers. It occurred to me that I hadn't just been forgotten. Being forgotten implies a lapse in memory. This felt different. This felt intentional. I opened Instagram, a habit I should have broken years ago. My thumb hovered over the search bar before I even realized what I was doing. Jody's profile picture was glowing with the colorful ring of a news story. I tapped it. The screen exploded with light and sound, music, laughter, the clinking of expensive crystal. It was a surprise party. A big one. The venue was unmistakable. It was the family estate, the sprawling ranch-style home I had spent the last 5 years paying the mortgage on through a private holding company. I watched the video clips as Jody, draped in a silk dress that cost more than my first car, shrieked in delight as the lights came on. There was my mother, Lori, beaming with a pride I hadn't seen directed at me since I won a 3rd-grade spelling bee. There was my father, Drew, holding a tray of appetizers. Then came the post. A high-resolution photo of Lori and Jody hugging in front of a 3-tier designer cake. The caption read, "Celebrating our only proud daughter. The light of our lives. Happy 30th, Jody." The words didn't just sting, they performed a digital execution of my existence. Only proud daughter. We were twins. We shared a womb, a birthday, and a last name. Yet, in the eyes of the people who brought me into this world, I had been completely erased. I sat there in the dark office, the hum of the servers suddenly sounding like a funeral dirge. I had been the one to fix the roof when it leaked. I had been the one to navigate the legal mess when Drew's business faltered. I had been the ghost in the machine, making sure their lives ran smoothly while I remained invisible. I felt a sudden sharp heat behind my eyes, but I refused to let it spill. Instead, I opened my banking app. A series of alerts had been suppressed by my work focus mode. Transaction, $214, Phoenix Custom Cakes. Transaction, $1,200, Total Wine and More. Transaction, $850, Neiman Marcus. All of them were charged to the emergency credit card I had given Lori last year, the card that was strictly for medical emergencies and pharmacy costs. They had used my sweat and my overtime to fund the party they didn't invite me to. They had used my money to buy the cake that Lori said she baked in the comments. I leaned back in my chair, my breath hitching in the dry office air. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from being the family's safety net while being treated like their floor mat. I realized then that boundaries aren't an act of aggression. They are an act of preservation. If you give without limits to those who have no gratitude, you aren't being kind. You are simply participating in your own destruction. My mother always told me I was the strong one. She used that word like a shield to protect herself from having to care about my feelings. Calliope is strong. She can handle it. Jody is sensitive. She needs us. It was a lie. I wasn't born strong. I was made hard by the absence of their warmth. I stared at the photo on the screen for a long time. My parents were glowing. Jody was radiant. They looked like a perfect American family, a masterpiece of social media branding. But a house built on someone else's foundation can only stand as long as that person chooses to hold it up. My hand was steady as I moved the cursor. I didn't type a furious comment. I didn't call Lori to scream about the credit card. That would be playing the role they expected, the bitter, jealous sister. No, I did something far more permanent. I tapped the little heart icon on the post. I liked it. It was a formal receipt, a signature on a contract they didn't realize was about to expire. I wasn't liking the photo. I was liking the memory of who I used to be, because that version of Calliope Turner died the moment I read that caption. I closed Instagram and opened my master infrastructure portal. As a systems engineer, I had designed the Turner estate to be the pinnacle of smart home living. I had automated the HVAC, the irrigation, the security, and the utilities. It was all tied to my professional billing profile because it's easier for you to manage it, honey, Lori had said 2 years ago. I navigated to the household management tab. My finger hovered over the primary billing account. I wasn't hacking. I wasn't attacking. I was simply unlinking my identity from their lifestyle. I clicked the button to remove my credit card as the primary payment method for the Arizona Public Service and the City of Phoenix Water Department. The screen blinked. Warning, payment method removed. Account status reverted to property owner. Please note, unpaid balances may result in immediate service interruption. I felt a strange, cool peace wash over me. It wasn't the heat of revenge. It was the quiet power of a long overdue no. I looked at the clock. 12:01 a.m. Happy birthday to me. Before I logged out, I paused. I went into the deep system logs for the medical alert pendants I had installed for my father. Drew had a heart condition he liked to ignore, and I had programmed a specific override that would notify the local paramedics if his vitals spiked, regardless of whether the home Wi-Fi was active. I checked the code, ensured the backup cellular battery was at 100%, and added a small encrypted note in the technician log. Keep him safe. Even now, I couldn't completely abandon the duty of care, but I was done paying for the luxury of their indifference. I shut down my monitors one by one. The office plunged into total darkness, save for the red and green blinking lights of the server racks. I walked out of the glass tower and into the cool Phoenix night. I didn't know what would happen in 3 days when the grace periods expired and the desert heat began to seep into that house, but I knew one thing for certain. The person who used to care was no longer on the payroll. The morning air in Phoenix carries a dry, metallic scent that usually signals the start of another relentless day. I stood on my balcony, watching the sun bleed over the desert horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gold. The light crawled across the floor of my apartment, hitting the edges of the folders scattered across my coffee table like a silent reminder that truth, no matter how deeply buried, eventually forces its way into the light. My birthday had passed in a vacuum of silence from the people who shared my DNA, replaced by the mechanical hum of a glass office tower and a single devastating Instagram post. I wasn't acting out of spite as I opened my laptop. I was performing a long overdue professional audit. For years, I had treated my family's infrastructure as a sacred project, a technical labor of love meant to ensure their comfort. Now, looking at the data, I saw it for what it truly was. A non-performing account that had drained my spirit and my savings for far too long. I've always been told that being the strong child was a virtue, a badge of honor bestowed upon those of us who don't crack under pressure. But standing there in the burgeoning heat, I understood that strength was never a choice. It was a survival mechanism forced upon me by their strategic neglect. True forgiveness isn't about opening the door for people who have shown you they intend to burn the house down. It's about letting go of the desperate, childish hope that they will ever change. It is an act of self-respect to stop funding a stage for people who only use it to act as if you don't exist. My fingers moved across the keyboard with a steady, clinical precision. I wasn't just unlinking bank accounts. I was deconstructing the architecture of my own invisibility. I wondered, as I scrolled through the billing history, how many of you have spent your lives being the pillar for people who wouldn't even offer you a chair when you're tired? The rhythmic clicking of the keys suddenly pulled me into a memory so vivid I could almost smell the cheap coconut sunscreen. It was the summer of our 10th birthday. I remember the frantic energy in the house, the sound of suitcases zipping shut, and the high-pitched excitement in Jodi's voice. My parents, Lori and Drew, had surprised her with a trip to Disney World. A special celebration for a special girl, Lori had cooed. I stood by the hallway linen closet, my small hands gripping a stack of towels, waiting for my name to be called. It never was. Instead, Lori knelt down in front of me, her smile tight and rehearsed. She told me I was the reliable one, the daughter they could trust to stay behind and care for Grandma while she drifted through the final, foggy stages of her life. I watched from the front porch as the taillights of the car disappeared down the driveway, the exhaust fumes mingling with the dust of the Arizona summer. In that moment, the realization didn't come as a scream. It settled in my chest like a cold stone. My sister's joy would always be bought at the expense of my presence. I spent those 10 days in the quiet, dim rooms of my grandmother's house, holding her papery hand and singing the old songs she loved. No one was there to film it for a post, or to applaud my strength. But Grandma would squeeze my hand in the middle of a song, her eyes flickering with a moment of recognition that felt more like love than anything I had found in the car that drove away. I learned early on that kindness is a gift you give yourself, a quiet internal wealth that no one can steal. That little girl, Calliope, had already begun to build the fortress that the adult woman was now securing. Back in the present, I opened the master dashboard for the Turner Phoenix estate. The interface was elegant, a testament to my skills as an engineer, controlling everything from the high-capacity HVAC to the smart locks on the refrigerated wine cellar. My finger hovered over the primary billing method. I wasn't just hitting a button, I was removing the oxygen from a lifestyle built on my silence. I carefully exported 5 years of tax documents and utility receipts to a secure cloud drive, ensuring a clear legal paper trail of my financial support. In the eyes of the law, I was a silent benefactor. Today, I was simply an engineer closing a defunct project. The prompt on the screen asked for a final confirmation. Delete billing method. Responsibility will revert to property owners, Lori and Drew Turner. I looked at the names. They felt like strangers from a book I had finished reading. I clicked confirm. The screen refreshed instantly. The green active status of the accounts turned to a neutral, impending gray. The countdown to the grace period's end had begun. It felt less like a strike and more like a heavy weight being lifted off my shoulders, leaving me with a terrifying, beautiful sense of lightness. If family is a debt, I had paid my interest in full, many times over. I leaned back, the silence of my apartment no longer feeling lonely, but profoundly peaceful. Sometimes walking away is the loudest thing you can ever do. Have you ever reached that point where you realized the only way to save yourself was to let go of everything you were taught to hold on to? The Arizona sun is a relentless witness. By mid-afternoon on January 16th, the heat in Phoenix had peaked at 105 degrees, transforming the asphalt into a shimmering mirage. I sat in a small, dimly lit cafe 3 miles away from my parents' estate, the air conditioning humming a quiet mechanical tune against the window pane. On the marble table before me, my laptop screen displayed a series of red, cascading lines, the heartbeat of a dying infrastructure. For 30 years, I had been the unseen architect of their comfort. Now, I was merely an observer watching the blueprint dissolve. Back at the Turner estate, the desert's mercy had officially run out. I could almost feel the stagnant weight of the air through the sensor data on my dashboard. Inside those walls, the sophisticated smart HVAC system remained dormant, its digital brain locked behind a payment wall that my mother, Lori, didn't even know existed. The grace period I had established years ago had expired at noon. No money, no cool air. It was a binary reality in a world they treated like a fairy tale. Jody was in the middle of one of her curated after-birthday tea parties, a shallow gathering designed specifically for the lens of her followers. I watched a brief stuttering live stream before the Wi-Fi cut out. Guests in silk dresses were fanning themselves with linen napkins, their faces glistening with a sweat that no filter could hide. The luxury facade was literally melting. In the kitchen, the 3-tier designer cake, the one bought with my emergency credit card, had begun to sag into a sugary, multicolored sludge on the granite counter. It was a perfect metaphor for their lifestyle. Beautiful on the outside, but structurally hollow when the temperature rose. I saw Lori in the background of the video. Her face flushed a frantic shade of crimson as she stabbed at the high-tech wall interface I had installed. She was trying to override the system manually, but the credentials were mine. The only proud daughter was standing right there, draped in jewelry I had likely subsidized, looking completely useless as a real-world technical crisis took hold. Logic doesn't care about your follower count. Engineering doesn't respond to entitlement. By 2 p.m., the temperature inside the house had hit 90 degrees and was climbing toward a dangerous equilibrium with the outside world. The system reached its secondary failsafe. Because the utility account was flagged as suspended, the smart locks on the refrigerated wine cellar engaged to protect the inventory from spoilage. Lori's expensive champagne was now trapped behind 2 inches of tempered glass and an encrypted keypad. I leaned back in my chair at the cafe, taking a slow, meditative sip of my iced tea. I felt a fleeting pang of sadness, not for the loss of their comfort, but for the profound ignorance that had led them to this moment. They truly believed that the lights stayed on, and the water stayed clear simply because they existed. They never realized that the invisible daughter was actually the invisible spine of their home. Every cool breeze they enjoyed for 5 years had a name, and that name was Calliope. Jody's meltdown, according to the last few frantic texts from her friends that leaked into the group chat, wasn't about the physical danger of the heat. It was about the loss of the Wi-Fi. She couldn't upload her aesthetic photos. She couldn't maintain the illusion. Without the digital stage I provided, she was just a woman in a hot room with melting makeup. It made me wonder, how many people in our lives only value us for the utilities we provide? Have you ever noticed that the moment you stop being useful, you suddenly become difficult? I remember a mentor once telling me that maturity is realizing you can't keep setting yourself on fire just to keep people warm, who wouldn't even hand you a cup of water in a drought. For decades, I had been the one providing the water, the fire, and the shelter, only to be told I was the only one not worth celebrating. The irony wasn't lost on me as I watched the system pings go silent one by one. I was finally choosing my own peace over their manufactured chaos. Then the phone rang. It was Lori. I let it vibrate against the table for 5 full seconds before I answered. I didn't say hello. I didn't offer a platitude. I simply waited. Her voice came through the speaker like a jagged blade, screeching with an entitlement that had been sharpened by the heat. "Calliope! What the hell have you done?" she screamed. "The power is out. The water pressure is gone. Your sister is having a full-blown panic attack, and we have guests. Fix this house this instant." I adjusted the volume on my phone, my voice coming out steady and low, a sharp contrast to her hysteria. "I haven't done anything, Mother. That's the point. I've simply stopped doing everything." "What are you talking about? Stop being so dramatic and call the electric company. We're roasting in here." "The accounts are no longer in my name, Lori," I said, using her first name for the first time in my life. It felt like a small, necessary act of tectonic shift. The grace period ended at noon. If Jody is the daughter who makes you so proud, the light of your life, then surely she can find a way to pay for the air she breathes. Or perhaps she can use the pride you have in her to negotiate with the utility board. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by a gasp of pure, unadulterated rage. "How could you be so cruel? To your own blood? On your sister's birthday week?" Cruelty is using an emergency medical card to buy a party cake for a daughter you didn't even invite, I replied. Cruelty is erasing me from the very life I was paying for. I'm not being cruel, Lori. I'm being professional. I'm a system engineer, and I've officially decommissioned this project. I did, however, offer a single moment of grace. I knew my father, Drew, was in that house, and despite his cowardly silence, I didn't want him to suffer a heat stroke. I told her I had already vetted a local HVAC contractor who worked on weekends. I gave her his number, but I made the terms very clear. The bill had to be paid upfront, in cash, or via a verified card in their name. No more of my money, no more of my labor. I hung up before she could respond. The moral weight of the moment sat heavy in my gut, a deep-rooted sorrow that comes from realizing the people who raised you don't actually know you at all. But beneath that sorrow was a new, budding sense of empowerment. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let them feel the full, unbuffered weight of their own choices. If you keep holding the umbrella for them, they'll never understand why they're getting wet. I realized that saying no to family isn't about being a villain. It's about finally being the hero of your own life. Have you ever had to draw a line in the sand, knowing that once you did, there was no going back? The cafe was quiet. I closed my laptop and watched a single drop of condensation slide down the side of my glass. I was 30 years old, and for the first time, the air I was breathing belonged entirely to me. The Arizona sunset had long since faded, leaving my apartment in a stillness so thick it felt tangible. I sat at my dining table, the air around me undisturbed by the chaos I knew was brewing across town. The only light came from the cool, clinical glow of my dual monitors, casting long shadows against the white walls. I wasn't acting out of a desire for vengeance. I was conducting an autopsy on a relationship that had died years ago without me noticing. My fingers moved with a steady, mechanical rhythm across the glass trackpad. I was cross-referencing 3 years of emergency medication credit card statements with Jody's public Instagram archives. It was a tedious, heart-wrenching puzzle. The $200 designer cake Lori bragged about baking for the surprise party. I found the transaction. It was processed at a high-end bakery in Scottsdale, labeled under Pharmacy, Phoenix General, on the statement I paid every month. But as I dug deeper into the digital shadows, I stumbled upon something far more sinister than a stolen birthday cake. My parents' joint retirement fund, a modest nest egg they had spent 40 years building, was hemorrhaging money. I found a string of unauthorized withdrawals, $1,500 here, $3,000 there, all masked as house maintenance fees. These were costs I was already covering through my holding company. The weight of the truth settled in my gut like cold iron. Some people don't just take what they need to survive. They take everything you have because they believe your labor is their birthright. I had spent my entire adult life trying to be the bridge that kept them from falling into the abyss, only to realize they were using my back as a walkway to carry stolen goods. You cannot heal a wound while the person who caused it is still holding the knife, and Jody had been twisting that blade for years while smiling for the camera. I opened the family group chat, a digital space currently vibrating with the frantic, entitled energy of a cornered animal. Lori was mid-rant about the unacceptable heat and the malfunctioning locks on the wine cellar. Jody was chiming in with crying emojis, lamenting how her big milestone was being ruined by technical incompetence. I didn't type a single word in response. I didn't need to shout to be heard. Instead, I uploaded a single encrypted PDF document titled Turner Family Financial Audit 2024 to 2026. The silence that followed was absolute. I knew they were opening it. I knew they were seeing the highlighted rows of $17,000 Jody had drained from our parents' future to buy influencer engagement, and a closet full of designer labels she couldn't afford. The only proud daughter was effectively a parasite, feeding on the retirement of 2 people who were too blinded by her glitter to see her greed. I felt a sharp, crystalline disappointment, but no surprise. I moved to a private window and sent a direct message to my father, Drew. Dad, I wrote, my heart heavy but my mind clear. I've attached the recovery path gauge drafted. If you choose to handle Jody's withdrawals as a legal matter of fraud, there is a way to get your retirement back. I'm still here if you want to be a father instead of an enabler. I didn't expect him to choose me, but I wanted the offer to exist in the record of my own conscience. I closed the laptop and stood up, the silence of the room finally feeling like a choice rather than a punishment. I pulled a few sturdy cardboard boxes from the closet and set them on the hardwood floor. It was time to pack. My engineering degree went in first, followed by the only photo I had of my grandmother and my passport. I sat down at my desk and reviewed the documents Gage had sent over from the LLC. As the sole owner of the holding company that technically held the deed to the Phoenix estate, I picked up a pen and signed the intent to liquidate non-essential assets. My parents had lived there for 30 years, but they had defaulted 3 years ago. I had saved the house then, but I was done being the family's safety net. If you had to choose between being the villain in their story or a perpetual victim in your own, which would you pick? I've spent my life being told that family comes first, but no one ever told me that I was allowed to be part of that family too. I looked at the like I had given Jody's photo days ago. It was a tiny digital tombstone for a 30-year delusion. It was the last thing I would ever give them for free. I taped the first box shut with a sharp, final screech of packing tape. I didn't know where exactly I was going yet, but I knew I was moving toward a version of Calliope Turner that didn't require permission to exist. The air in my apartment felt thinner, sharper, more honest. I was no longer a shadow in their light. I was the one who had finally turned the lights out. The morning of January 18th brought a suffocating heat that seemed to seep through the very glass of my balcony doors. I stood in my living room, surrounded by half-packed boxes, feeling the internal vibration of my phone on the granite countertop. Across the city, the Turner estate had become a pressure cooker of desperation and sweat. The financial exposure I had initiated days earlier had stripped away their dignity, leaving only the raw, jagged edges of their entitlement. They were cornered animals now, and I knew from experience that a cornered animal doesn't seek a path to redemption. It seeks a way to bite. In their reckless drive to reclaim the comfort they believed I owed them, Lori and Jody had moved beyond mere words. They had refused to acknowledge the stolen retirement funds or the years of my silent labor. Instead, they took a path of catastrophic ignorance. They hired an untraceable handyman from a digital classified ad, a man willing to bypass the encrypted smart grid I had built to protect that home. Their goal was to force the power back on, to hack the system they viewed as an intruder rather than a provider. The inevitable happened. In their frantic attempt to jumpstart the main electrical panel, they caused a localized fire. I watched the system alerts spike on my laptop, surges of unmanaged current followed by a flat line of sensor data. But instead of the panic a normal family would feel at nearly burning their house down, Lori saw a different kind of opportunity. She didn't see a fire. She saw a weapon. She saw a way to finally bring the unruly daughter to heel through a final, dark manipulation of the truth. The phone call came at 2:15 p.m. I let it ring until the very last second, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. When I finally answered, there was no screaming this time. Lori's voice was unnervingly calm, a whisper of pure, concentrated malice that made the hair on my arms stand up. "The police are here, Calliope," she said, her tone dripping with a rehearsed grief. "And the fire marshal. They're looking at the charred remains of our electrical room. We have a witness, the man who was here to help us, who says he saw the smart grid activate just before the spark. He says it looked like someone was accessing it remotely, like an attack." I gripped the edge of my table, my knuckles turning white as I absorbed the sheer depravity of the frame-up. She wasn't just asking for money anymore. She was threatening my freedom. "Fix this, Calliope," Lori continued, her voice hardening. "Return every cent of the money you're auditing. Clear Jody's debts and restore this house to its proper state. If you don't, we provide our statements. We file charges for attempted murder and arson. I'm sure a jury would love to hear how the jealous twin tried to burn her family alive on their birthday week. I listened to the woman who gave me life as she systematically tried to destroy it. There is a specific kind of cold that settles in your marrow when you realize there is no bottom to the cruelty of the people who were supposed to love you. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. I simply existed in the hollow space her words had carved out. I wondered in that heavy silence if any of you have ever had to face the reality that your own blood would rather see you behind bars than see you free from their control. I remained silent, letting her talk until the line went dead. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a gasp or a plea. I simply set the phone down and called Gage. It was time to activate the shield I had built years ago, not out of paranoia, but out of a deep-seated professional foresight. "Gage, it's happening," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "They've tried to bypass the grid and caused a fire. Now they're trying to frame me for remote tampering. I need the redundant logs pulled immediately." What Lori didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that as a systems engineer, I never leave a back door open without a camera watching it. I had off-site, immutable cloud logs of every single packet of data that had entered or exited that smart grid. Those logs would show a total lack of activity from my IP address since the moment I disabled the autopay. They would show the manual override attempt from inside the house. My foresight wasn't just a career habit, it was my salvation. I sat in the middle of my boxes, realizing the hard truth that family is a title earned through consistent behavior, not a biological right granted at birth. Blood might be thicker than water, but it's also easier to spill. I remembered a saying that the same fire that melts butter hardens steel. For 30 years, I had been the butter, softening myself to fit into the gaps they left behind. But that day, under the threat of Lori's malice, I finally became the steel. Even as my heart felt like it was being severed from my past, a small, stubborn part of my humanity remained. I told Gage to ensure that the invoice for the fire department's response was fully paid via my account one last time. I didn't do it for Lori or Jody. I did it because the neighbors shouldn't have to suffer for the Turner family's insanity. I did it because I refused to let their ugliness turn me into someone who didn't care about the world around her. Is it really betrayal if they never truly stood by you in the first place? At what point does turning the other cheek simply become an invitation for more pain? I stood up and looked at my reflection in the dark screen of my monitor. I wasn't the shadow anymore. I was the person holding the evidence. I was the person with the truth. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the fire they started. I was the one who knew exactly how to put it out. The air in my apartment was thin and sharp, but for the first time, it was honest. I had fought the people who were supposed to protect me, and I had survived. The ties that bound me to that house weren't just frayed, they were cauterized. I was ready for the final confrontation, not as a victim, but as the owner of the narrative. The morning air outside the Turner estate was thick with the scent of singed ozone and the bitter tang of desert dust. I stood before the front door, the heavy brass handle feeling cold against my palm. Behind me, Gage adjusted his tie, his expression as unreadable as the legal briefs tucked inside his leather case. I wasn't the same woman who had left this house in a cloud of invisible grief years ago. Today, I was returning as the owner of the narrative, ready to confront the ghosts that had tried to bury me in the dark. Inside, the house felt like a tomb of its own making. The living room was dim, the air stagnant, and smelling faintly of the electrical fire that had nearly consumed the master panel. Lori and Jody were perched on the designer sofa, their faces masks of smug, calculated confidence. They looked up as I entered, Lori's eyes narrowing with a look that was meant to be intimidating, but only felt desperate. She honestly believed that her frame-up had me pinned to the wall. "You're late, Calliope," Lori said, her voice dripping with a rehearsed authority. "We've already spoken to our lawyers. They say your remote tampering is a felony. Arson, attempted murder. But we're family, aren't we? We're willing to make this go away if you sign the restitution agreement and the support contract." She pushed a sheaf of papers across the coffee table, a confession of guilt and a lifelong financial shackle. I didn't even look at them. My eyes were fixed on the scorched patch of wall behind her, the black soot a physical manifestation of their destructive nature. It was a visual reminder that some bridges aren't burned by choice. They are burned by the sheer toxicity of the people standing on them. In that moment, the final tether of sentimentality snapped with a quiet, internal thud. "Sign it," Jody added, her voice high and sharp. "Unless you want to see what the inside of a cell looks like. We have a witness. We have the fire marshal's preliminary report." I didn't answer them immediately. I looked at my father, Drew, who was standing by the window, his back to the room. He looked smaller than I remembered, his shoulders hunched as if trying to hide from the very air he breathed. I wondered how many of you have sat in a room full of people who share your blood, only to realize you are the only one speaking the language of the truth. Gage stepped forward, his boots clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor. He didn't say a word as he opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of notarized documents. The paper felt heavy, legitimate, and final. He laid them on the table, right on top of Lori's ridiculous confession. "Let's discuss the actual law," Gage said, his voice a calm, professional baritone. "We've reviewed the deeds for this property. 3 years ago, when the Turner family defaulted on the primary mortgage, the debt was purchased by a private holding company, C. Turner Smart Holdings, LLC. Lori laughed, a jagged, nervous sound. "So what? Calliope just paid the bills. That's what daughters do." "No, Mother," I said, my voice cutting through her noise like a surgeon's blade. "I didn't just pay the bills. I bought the bank's interest. I am the sole member of that LLC, which means I am the owner of this house. You aren't family living in your ancestral home. Under Arizona property law, you are tenants at sufferance. And as of 2 hours ago, my insurance company has already filed a subrogation claim against you for the waste, the property damage caused by your unauthorized handyman." The smugness drained from Lori's face, replaced by a gray, ashen shock that was almost cinematic in its totality. Jody stood up, her face flushed with a visceral rage. "You're lying! This is our home! You can't just take it!" "I didn't take it, Jody. I saved it when you were busy draining the retirement fund," I replied, my gaze unwavering. "And I have the off-site logs from the smart grid that prove I haven't accessed the panel in 6 days. Your witness is going to have a very difficult time explaining his perjured statement to the authorities once they see the data. Freedom is what you do with what has been done to you. For 30 years, you treated me like an intruder in my own life. Now, you're the ones who are out of time." I reached into Gage's file and pulled out a formal document. It was a 3-day notice to quit, an eviction. I slid it across the table. The white paper looked blindingly bright against the dark wood. "You have 72 hours to vacate the premises," I said, the words feeling like a heavy stone being lifted off my chest. "I'm not doing this because I hate you. I'm doing this because I can no longer subsidize your cruelty. I am the invisible child, remember? And as of today, my money and this house will be just as invisible to you." Jody began to scream, something about her brand and her rights, but the sound felt distant, like a radio playing in another room. She was fighting for a pedestal that had already crumbled beneath her. I stared her down with a chilling calm that eventually sucked the air right out of her lungs. She looked at me, and for the first time in 30 years, she finally saw me. "You're a monster," Lori whispered, her voice trembling. "No, Lori, I'm an engineer," I replied. "I'm simply correcting a structural flaw." I turned to my father, who had finally faced the room. His eyes were wet, filled with a heartbreaking justice that had come far too late. I pulled out a smaller envelope and held it out to him. It contained a prepaid lease for a modest, safe apartment in North Phoenix, in his name only. "This is for you, Dad," I said softly. "It's a chance to leave, to find a life that isn't built on lies and enabling. But you have to choose to walk through that door alone. I can't carry you anymore." He took the envelope with a hand that shook like a leaf in a storm. He didn't say thank you. He didn't have to. The silence in the room was the most honest thing we had ever shared. It was a somber victory, a quiet release of burdens I had been carrying since I was 10 years old. They say home is where they have to take you in, but what happens when home becomes the place that eats you alive? Would you have the courage to hand them an eviction notice for your own heart? I stood in the center of the room I had once feared, and I realized I was no longer afraid of their ghosts. I had turned the lights out on their illusions, and for the first time I could see the exit clearly. I walked out of the house, the scent of the desert air meeting me on the porch like an old friend. The keys I left on the table were the heaviest things I had ever carried, but my hands were no longer shaking. I didn't know what was waiting for me in the next city, but I knew I was leaving the shadows behind. I was 30 years old, and I was finally, legally, and spiritually free. As I reached the car, I didn't look back. The heat was still there, but it didn't feel like a cage anymore. It felt like the sun. The pre-dawn chill of the Phoenix desert air clung to the terminal windows at Sky Harbor, a final cold embrace from a place that had defined my struggle for 30 years. I sat at gate B15, my entire life condensed into 2 hardshell suitcases and a leather carry-on. Inside that bag lay the only fragments of the past I chose to keep: my engineering certifications, my passport, and my grandmother's tattered journal. I watched through the glass as the first sliver of the sun began to bleed over the tarmac, a sharp, golden contrast to the memory of the scorched walls I had walked away from just days before. The desert is a beautiful, unforgiving teacher. It reminds you that things only survive here if they are built to endure the harshest conditions. I leaned my head against the cool terminal seat, the rhythmic hum of the airport acting as a heartbeat for my new beginning. For decades, I had accepted the label of the invisible child, as if it were a life sentence. But as I watched the baggage handlers move with purposeful efficiency below, a new clarity settled over me. Being invisible hadn't been a weakness, it had been my greatest advantage. It gave me the silence to observe, the space to learn, and the fuel to build a world that my family could no longer reach or ruin. I thought about the wisdom of those who came before me, those who knew that no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. For 30 years, I had signed that consent form every single morning. Today, I was officially revoking it. My phone buzzed in my pocket, the vibrations startling me in the quiet terminal. I expected another venomous outburst from Lori, but the name on the screen was Drew, my father. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the glass, before finally opening the message. It wasn't a demand or a scream. It was a quiet, typed confession. Calliope, I looked at the lease for the apartment you left. I'm moving my things in today. I was wrong to let your light be dimmed just to keep Jody in the spotlight. I'm sorry. The words didn't magically erase the decades of silence or the moments he looked away while I was being erased. But they were honest. The final cord of resentment that had tethered me to that desert soil finally snapped. Not with a bang, but with a weary, genuine sense of peace. I felt a bittersweet warmth spread through my chest. He was finally choosing a path, even if he had to find it in the wreckage I left behind. I glanced at a social media notification that had popped up just below his text. Jody had posted a blurry, tearful photo of moving boxes with a caption about surviving toxic family. The engagement was low. The comments were few. The world was finally seeing through the high saturation filter, and for the first time in my life, I felt no need to look at the comments. I took a deep breath and sent a short, final reply to my father. The utility accounts for your new place are prepaid for 6 months, Dad. I've ensured the smart locks are set to your biometrics only. Use that time to find your own voice. I wish you peace. I put the phone on Do Not Disturb and slid it into my bag. I had provided the shelter. Now it was up to him to build the home. The gate agent announced the boarding for the flight to Chicago. I stood up, my movements feeling lighter, more rhythmic, as if the gravity of Arizona no longer applied to me. On my way to the jet bridge, I stopped at a small terminal bakery and bought a single, simple vanilla cupcake. It wasn't a 3-tier proud daughter masterpiece draped in fondant and lies. It was a small, honest celebration that I had earned with my own hands. As the plane taxied and finally ascended over the jagged peaks of the Arizona mountains, I settled into my seat. I peeled back the paper of the cupcake and took a slow, deliberate bite. The world below began to shrink. The estate, the scorched panel, the desert heat. All of it becoming a map of a life I no longer lived. I realized then that family isn't just about the blood you share. It's about who is willing to share the burden of the truth with you. I looked out at the vast expanse of the horizon, eager to meet the version of Calliope Turner that wasn't defined by what she could provide for others. The Chicago skyline emerged from the clouds like a promise kept. After 30 years, I was no longer just a shadow in the room. I was the one holding the light.